So I'm in a bit of a conundrum. Every single book that I'm going to talk about this month, except for one, you have already heard about if you have watched my Axiom's End review or my long lost library haul. Now, I don't want to assume that everybody has, 49 minutes, if you put them together, to waste on my channel. So I'm going to run through all these books again, but I'm probably going to do it in a more abbreviated way so as not to waste time. The first book I read this month was Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. This book makes me so emotional. I read it first in school, and it was one of the few pieces of literature that really punched me in the gut. The story is about a man named Okonkwo, who was mainly fueled by the fear of becoming like his father. Okonkwo is an excellent fighter, a good provider for his children and his wives. He also can be proud and arrogant. He also can be prone to violence and impulsive behavior. And he spends this entire book trying to grapple with what it means to be a man, what it means to be strong, and not just strong for himself as an individual, but strong for his village and his people. So when British missionaries come, bringing their new religion, bringing their new form of government, their new form of new ways of interacting with the land and the gods and goddesses and the culture of his people. This is set in Africa in a fictional village. It leads to disastrous results. And this book was published in 1958, I believe. 1959. I think I did that in the last video too, 1959. And I remember doing research on it and learning that one of the reasons it was such a powerhouse book was it was the first time that an African writer was writing from an African experience. And I know African is such a broad umbrella term because it's a continent, not a country, but all of the other literature about the dark continent up until that point had been written from a very ethnocentric perspective. It was, Heart of Darkness and all these types of books and novels that exoticized and fetishized and made the other feel like a savage, primitive being. And so seeing this clash of culture, seeing the personal effects of colonization on these characters in this book is such a damning portrayal of some of the damage that those interactions can cause. And I feel like this is a book with no wasted words. I mean, it is a short book, but every single sentence, every chapter toggles back and forth between painting the picture of this society, of this community before the introduction of Christianity and certain behavior that is justified by Christianity and after. And this book does not have a happy ending if that's something that you're looking for, but it is so worth the read. And just the themes of power and family and religion and culture. This actually turned out to be one of the required readings for a grad class I'm taking, and so I thought that was kind of funny that was chosen. But I'm excited to get to read this book again with the guidance of a professor in a specific context. Like, this book is required for a class I'm taking called Race, Religion, and Nation, and this absolutely is about race, religion, and nation. The next book I read this month was Lead from the Outside, formerly published under the title Minority Leader, How to Build Your Future and Make Real Change by Stacey Abrams. So this book was a little bit of a disappointment, and that is nothing to say. That's not to say anything about Stacey's writing style, but simply I felt that a lot of what she was talking about I had already heard or read through other books. Now, this book reminds me of the metaphor of the bread aisle. I was taught this metaphor by my friend who is a screenwriter who went to USC. This idea that you walk down the bread aisle and there are 50 million different versions of bread, but they're all bread. They are all used to make sandwiches and toast and things like that. And this idea that you must have a completely unique and original idea in order to create something is false, because there really are no unique ideas under the sun. So keeping that in mind, the reason I was a little bit disappointed in this book, the first third was hard for me to get through, was because it was hitting on a lot of themes that I feel like I've already absorbed and applied to my life. Not to completion, not to perfection, but when it comes to navigating being the only Black person in the office, being the first woman to ever hold a position, the ways you have to balance what you actually feel and how your intentions are coming through to behavior and how people are reacting to it, what it's like to navigate cultural politics, corporate politics, actual politics, as Stacey Abrams is a politician. She was the minority leader in the Democratic Party, and she ran for governor and unfortunately lost last year. And she also works to help fight voter suppression and register people to vote. She had my vote when that election came around, and I found it very, very admirable the way that she fought voter suppression and continues to do so. But that all being said, I just didn't feel like I learned anything new from this book until we got to like the end or the last half. It's a mix of her personal experiences growing up, applying to be a Rhodes Scholar, going to Ivy League schools, being a lawyer, like all of the personal stuff about her life. I love that. I love just knowing people's backstories. I love when they share a story from high school or college or early career that taught them a broader lesson that they carry through. I love all of that. But it's just when we got to the kind of the end of each chapter and it was like, okay, so here's a lesson I want you to take from this, I felt like I had already heard all of the lessons, except for mainly two things. One, she really harped on the power of money and understanding money. Of course, American politics has a lot to do with fundraising. There's super PACs and corporations as people. There's all this stuff going on. But as someone who used to work in a nonprofit, knowing how to read a budget, knowing how to navigate a situation with donors and fundraisers in which you are trying to learn what is important to them, tie that into what is important about your organization to hopefully get funds to support a project or a community building initiative, being able to look at an organization kind of at a bird's eye view and see where the money is going, why it's going there, what justifications people have for making those choices, and how they line up with their budgets, how they line up with their priorities and their values is so important. So that whole section talking about money, I found really, really helpful, since those are things that I knew that I was learning through my previous job, but hearing it through the lens of politics was really valuable. I also liked how she used examples from people who weren't just Black women. She talked about the first openly gay Korean American congressman. She talked about a Latina woman whose idea was taken from her company, and somebody else headed up the division of the idea that she created because of her own self-defeating behavior combined with sexism and racism. She used a lot of examples of people who are outsiders, who are minority leaders, to kind of blow up and blow out what is comparable across these different experiences. So don't think that if you are not a Black woman, this book has nothing for you, because it absolutely does. And whether she's talking about corporate America, politics, nonprofit, her personal life, I like that there was definitely some sections in here that I love where she talked about the fact that, she loved being a lawyer. She loves being a politician. She also loves being an author. She writes a romance and suspense novels under the name Selena Montgomery. And you can tell this is not the first book she's written, because the quality of the writing is there. It's just, I don't know if I'm explaining this in the best way, but while this book absolutely has value, and I'm glad I read it, and I think that other people can learn a lot from it, because this is not the first book I've read about these things. It's not the first book I read about people who are different, trying to be leaders in their field, navigating race and gender and socioeconomic background, finding ways to be your full, authentic self while also protecting yourself against some of the forces that don't want you to succeed. I have spent a lot of time thinking about those same things, experiencing those same things, reading other texts that delve into those same things. And this book, Lead from the Outside, just in that category doesn't rise to the top of the pack. But I do still think it is a good book. And if you are someone who hasn't read a lot in that field at all, I think this is a great place to start, especially in the structure. As I said, she goes from personal story to here's how she applied that lesson throughout her life. And at the end of each chapter, she also has a list of resources. So websites, articles to read, free software for learning how to budget, free online classes if you want to learn about some things she's talking about. I think it's a very useful text. And that's another reason why I'm glad I have it. Also, just wanted to point out, this one has her autograph in it. This is not my book. I borrowed it from my stepmom. But as a politician, while I don't, and honestly, is there any politician who I agree with everything they've done? But I really, really admire her trajectory and her candor and the way she chooses to not play the game as she is supposed to, as a single Black, dark-skinned woman. this book I you can tell I have some meh about it, because I am glad I read it, but this is not something that I would rush to reread. And again, whether or not I would reread a book, like I've read this one like 3 or 4 times, usually is my marker. So I hope that was helpful. Keep that in mind. Next, we have Change Me Into Zeus's Daughter by Barbara Robinette Moss. Just so you know, things fall apart. This book and the last book I'm going to talk about were all in my long lost library haul. So if you want to hear a lot more about these books, you can find that in there. This book is about Barbara, who was one of 9 children growing up in the rural South, well below the poverty line in the 1960s. This is a memoir in which she says she attempts to reclaim her history, and I love her for it. I don't remember where I got this book. I got this book when I was in middle school or high school, and I don't know what would have compelled me to pick it up, but I love it. She speaks about her childhood, her upbringing with such clarity, with such specificity, with beautiful descriptions of, the Alabama countryside, and vivid descriptions of looking at her own face in the mirror that's been warped by malnutrition and poor health care, and the way that she uses makeup and silly putty and tissues stuffed in her sister's bra to try to create a vision of womanhood, a vision of beauty. Change Me Into Zeus's Daughter. Zeus's daughter is the goddess of beauty, Venus, all of that, how that shapes her life. And I think there's something so powerful about not being afraid to speak of things that are considered shameful within most families. Her father was an alcoholic, abusive man. Her mother was a woman who was talented and smart and could sing and taught them poetry and dance and history, but also was so invested in her identity as this man's wife that she didn't leave him until years and years and years of, abuse and infidelity and this, that, and the other. And I love the way that Barbara finds a way to build a life for herself that is not entirely free of the influences of her past, because who among us can claim to have the strength to do that, but is always moving forward, pushing towards experiencing beauty, being beautiful, creating a beautiful life for her and her son. She actually has a second book that I did not know about until I started doing research into her, because I've had this book for so long and I cannot wait to read it. But Change Me Into Zeus's Daughter, this book was the first time reading it when I was younger, was the first time that I felt I had an up close and personal fictional portrayal of poverty that shapes your life long after you are no longer living in the poverty line. But within that, the moments of beauty and chaos and experiences that you could only have in such an experience. I mean, she talks about what it feels like to have nowhere to hide during a tornado because of their rickety, unsafe house. And so her and her mother and all her siblings just cling to the railing as they're watching their father's chickens, as they're watching, barbed wire and hunks of dirt swirl in the air, and how it feels to no longer be afraid when there's no point to being afraid because there's nowhere you can run. All you can do is experience it. That was a story that I'm not saying you should take your kids to tornadoes so they can feel what it means to be alive. I'm not saying that at all, but just even throughout all of the awful, horrible, unfair things that happened to her and her family throughout their lives, her descriptions of beauty, such as being fearless in the face of the tornado, such as the taste of Alabama clay when she's pregnant and craving those minerals, her mother singing soprano arias while washing dishes and trying to figure out how to feed, 8 children with no money. It's the descriptions of beauty that really stuck with me and make me love this book so much. The next book I read was Axiom's End by Lindsay Ellis. I'm gonna try to keep this to like a 30-second review, because I did a full review that I'll put up in the atmosphere later. This book is written by Lindsay Ellis, who is a YouTuber. This is her debut novel, and the main character, Cora Sabino, is a 20-something woman who has a whistleblower for a father, an infamous man who is intent on exposing the government's cover-up of extraterrestrial life here on Earth. And Cora ends up involved in a situation where she is the interpreter, basically, for one of the aliens, one of the extraterrestrial creatures, and the relationship they form, all of the action and adventure as she's running to, working with, and working against the United States government, the long-term ramifications of the decisions that the people now are making in terms of the potential for contact with other types of life, in terms of intergalactic war, the morality question around how much do the American people deserve deserve to know what is best for them, what is best for the government, what is best in terms of safety. This is a fun book. It is fast-paced. I had a great time reading it. I do want to say, as I say in that video, that I don't read a lot of science fiction, so take that with a grain of salt. If you're someone who's like a hard sci-fi fan, maybe this is not the book for you, but I really, really enjoyed it, and I talk about that extensively in that video. And the last book I want to talk about this month is an old one. As you can see, this is Treasury of Children's Poetry edited by Allison Sage. Forward by Michael Rosen, edited by Allison Sage. This book, talk about this again in my long lost library haul. This is probably the most important book that I own. I do not consider myself to be well versed in poetry. I do not consider myself to be, a savant, an expert in any way, shape, or form. But I got this book when I was a child, and for my entire life, it has been a metric of my maturity, my reading comprehension, and growth. I have read this book countless times because every time I would get to a poem that I didn't understand, I would stop. So for context, the book starts with nursery rhymes and first poems. So things like, Jack and Jill went up a hill to fetch a pail of water. And by the time it ends, you're looking at Walt Whitman, you're looking at Shakespeare, you're looking at William Blake. Like, this is actually the last 2 pages in the book, and I just think they're stunning, absolutely stunning. Like, these are, I don't want to say hard poems to be intimidating, but these are adult poetry, I would say. Oh, I love this one, The Daffodils by Williams Wordsworth. And so the poems get more difficult, more intense, more profound, whatever you might say, as the book goes on. And so every time I would get to one I didn't understand, I'd stop. And then I'd pick up the book in 6 months, I'd pick up the book in a year. And when I noticed that I could read further, when I noticed that the poems meant something different to me, when I noticed that I was interpreting them in a different way, or they were bringing to mind different images or different experiences, that's how I knew that I was growing up. And so this book means so much to me, because even though now I can in a couple hours sit down and read the entire thing, there are still poems that I don't get. There are still poems that I don't resonate with. And there are some poems that are in like the early childhood section that I love even more than the Maya Angelou and the Walt Whitman and the ones that are technically in the adult section. And I think, I don't know, that means a lot to me. It means a lot to me that I'm not done growing up yet. That there is still poetry in this book that I have to sit on and chew on, that I don't really understand yet, that I don't really have a clear vision yet of what it means or what it's supposed to mean. And I think poetry is so hard to talk about because it can be so personal and so specific. And and in a world of Instagram poetry and classic poetry, and do you have to understand it? Does it have to rhyme? Is it couplets? Is it stanzas? I don't know, there's something about reading poetry that makes me feel very simple, and I like it because I already have this sense of judgment in my head that, oh, well, you don't understand iambic pentameter, you don't understand, the Latin influence, you don't understand all this intellectual stuff, which is actually a blessing. That means you just get to experience it. You get to just read it and feel things. So I would highly recommend this for anyone who has children, because this is a book that is going to be, I would argue, important or at least useful for a large scope of their life. And this is a book that I don't know if everyone will have the same sense of attachment to it, if it's something that you're coming to new, but it's a beautiful anthology. I really, really love it. And that was the last book that I read this month. So that was my August wrap up. I said I was going to try to be quick and brief, and I can already see the timer, and I'm at 20 minutes, which is what my last wrap up was. But I hope that if these books were in any way interesting to you, you'll check out those other 2 videos that talk about some of them in more depth. And I look forward to making more creative videos in the future. I'm in a bit of a slump, to be honest, because I just started grad school, which is exciting, but of course takes out a lot of energy mentally, and you're doing a lot of reading. So I'm a little I'm a little concerned that I won't be able to keep up my reading schedule when I'm in school. And I say that for me, because I like to read. I'm not yet at a point where I feel obligated to do anything for you, but I am grateful that you are here. So we'll see what kind of things I make next. I hope your summer is ending in a lovely, sweet way. And why do I feel the need to preach? As we move out of summer into fall, which for many of us, I would argue, is the start of a new year, whether you work in theater, whether you're an academic, whether you're a farmer, like in so many ways, I feel like fall is the beginning of the year rather than January. I hope you're gentle with yourself. I hope you are gentle with yourself. I hope you are honest with yourself. And I hope that these ways of communicating, these ways of building community, these ways of sharing things that we love and things that we're okay about and why, I hope this is still important to us as we move forward, because it's still important to me. Vulnerability. Goodbye.